Hello, everybody. It's time to talk about Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. Finally, I had posted a review the end of October on my Patreon for early release for those people who are subscribed to that. So now let's talk about it here. So Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, V.E. Schwab. I love her books. Every book that I've read by her has been a 4 or 5 star read for me. That's just me. I read Addie when it came out, Addie LaRue, and I loved it. And this book takes place in the same universe as that. Now, I want to give a little disclaimer that there are tiny, tiny little spoilers in my review because I spoiled a few things. So if you don't want to know what happens because you haven't read it yet, save this video for later. If you're okay with a few little spoilers, continue. So the book has vampires in it instead of, like a demon and somebody who can never die. I loved the book as much as I loved The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And the thing that drew me in very first with this book were the 3 words, toxic sapphic vampires. Because how can you resist that? So, as with most of her books, I loved the way that V.E. Schwab built up the characters in this book. It starts with Maria and Alice, a couple of chapters about each of them, going back and forth between Alice as a human and her past, and Maria, who was like hundreds of years before Alice, and her story, and how she met Sabine, how she met all these other people. V.E. Schwab really, really puts in effort to develop each character's personality, and you can really tell how distinct they all are from one another. And she really takes time to build up the background of each character and show you where each character in the book came from and how they grew into the characters they were by the end of the book. And when you meet Letty, because she comes in a little bit later, you learn how all 3 of them are interconnected. And even though they're all 3 very distinct people, you can tell that they all are important somehow in each other's lives. When Maria met Sabine, who is very interesting, Sabine was a widow and Maria was married to a man who was horrible. And Maria knew that she did not want to have kids with him. And she knew she was a lesbian, but she didn't really know how to describe it. And she had a thing for Sabine. So they met. She kind of slowly figured out that Sabine was a vampire. Oh my gosh. And Sabine ran kind of an herbalist shop where she could make little potions and things that would help with certain issues. And she made something to help prevent Maria from getting pregnant. And then she helped Maria do something to her husband. And then she also turned Maria into a vampire. But things did not end up well. And long story short, Maria took over Sabine's name and life and background and pretended that she was Sabine. And her story kind of traverses through her traveling a lot, her building up her life in different areas. She meets a man and his partner, and they spend some time together. She travels around, ends up in part of the royalty scene in London during their, what they call their season. If you've seen the show on Netflix with the people who dance and the big hair and Queen Charlotte, You know what I'm talking about, their season. So this book has a character named Charlotte as well. And Sabine, the new, meets her. They fall in love. Letty becomes a vampire. And everything sort of tumbles through all of these three characters, Sabine, Letty, and Charlotte. Alice. So you learn a lot about how they have these ideas about how vampires can die. And they say that vampires can die, but it's sort of complicated. They start this process of rotting, and you can tell when a vampire is rotting because they start getting so angry and rage filled and hateful, and they build up these attitudes that are really different from who they were maybe when they first got changed into vampires, and they end up usually either getting killed by them on their own or by somebody else. And I'm not going to say whether or not that happens to these characters, but they do talk about it. And I think that's a really interesting concept to me, because each author that has written a vampire book kind of has their own ways about how vampires can die, whether or not they can die. And I like the way that V.E. Schwab built up her vampires in this book and explained how they get changed, how they can die, what happens if they start rotting and they turn bad, and things like that. And she builds up how their past can affect whether or not they become the type of vampire who's going to rot. So, for example, she leaves things kind of open-ended with Alice at the end, and you don't really get a sense of whether or not she will rot, but based on the past and what happened with her sister, you can sort of decide for yourself whether or not you think her past as a human will affect her future as a new vampire. Letty and Sabine end up dating for centuries, like a couple hundred years, and then they finally break up in the 1970s, and Letty tries to hide from Sabine and thinks that she's being very successful because she doesn't see Sabine very much. But then little things start happening. Women that Letty has slept with, because she never really forms long-term attachments after she ends things with Sabine. Things got kind of tainted. So Sabine ends up finding the ladies that Letty was like betting, and does things to them that, are questionable at best. I think it's interesting when Letty finally realizes, oh my God, this woman has been stalking me since the 70s, and now it's the 2000s. What the fork am I going to do? I loved that there was that tension, though, and that dynamic and that build up to where everything just explodes at the end of the book when all three characters are near each other. I think V.E. Schwab has a great way of building up that tension and revealing a little bit at a time of what's going to happen and sort of foreshadowing how things might turn out. Like, you can kind of say, okay, she's talking about the rotting, and you can use that to say, I wonder if this is going to happen to Sabine or Letty or Alice, and let your imagination fill in those gaps and say, where are we going to go from here? And it makes it very intriguing. I think the writing style in the book was just as stellar as the writing in all of her other books that I've read and loved. I think that she, like I said, is just really incredible. Her descriptions of everything are very, very good. Her character development is wonderful. And overall, definitely a 5-star read. I was not at all surprised by how it ended, because I saw the way that things were building up between the characters, and I think that if you end up reading this book, you will love it too. So tell me if you've already read it, and if you haven't, go read it right now.